I am writing this because the universe is indifferent to our fear, but it is not indifferent to information. Information is the only thing that can outlast the body that carries it. If you are listening to this instead of reading it, imagine a voice that does not rush. Imagine someone who has spent his life studying things that cannot be touched and still believed he understood what it meant to be small. My name is Daniel Kerr. I am a physicist by training and a cave diver by poor self-control. I used to tell my students that the boundary between what we know and what we do not know is not a wall. It is a coastline. It changes with every tide. We map it, we name it, and then we step forward and discover the map was only ever a story we told ourselves. This is the story of what waited for us beneath a hillside that collapsed 3 months ago. Connor Hales found the entrance. Connor is the kind of person who sees the world as a set of seams. He can stand in a field and point to a depression in the grass and tell you where water wants to go. He grew up in limestone country. He knows the way the earth hollows itself out when it has enough time and enough patience. There was a landslide after a week of heavy rain. It was not dramatic in the cinematic sense. No thunderous collapse, no roaring wall of mud that swallowed houses. Just a slow failure. A slope that had been held together by roots and habit finally remembered gravity. The next day, Connor sent a photo to our group chat. A jagged mouth in the hillside, fresh rock, wet clay, a black oval where there should have been dirt. He wrote, "I think it opened into something. Air is coming out." That line did what it always does to people like us. It made the ordinary world feel temporary. It made me feel the way I feel when a new paper lands in my inbox, something that might rearrange my understanding of a familiar equation. The entrance was on private land, which is a polite way of saying it belonged to someone who did not know it belonged to something else. We met at dawn 3 days later. 4 of us: Connor, Mara Vance, Luis Ortega, and me. Mara is a paramedic and has the calm of someone who has been forced to stay calm while other people fall apart. Luis is an engineer and never stops measuring, even when there is nothing to measure but your patience. Connor, as I said, sees seams. I see patterns. I like to believe that makes me cautious, but it mostly just makes me confident. We stood at the edge of the opening and listened. It is difficult to describe a cave entrance that breathes. The air was cold and steady, flowing out as if the hillside were exhaling. It smelled like wet stone and old metal, not rust, something older, like pennies left in a jar for decades. Connor knelt near the rock and held a lighter to the gap. The flame leaned outward. Lewis looked at his watch and then at his phone, as if time could be cross-checked like a measurement. Mara asked how deep we thought it went. Connor answered with a shrug that translated cleanly into words, deep enough to regret curiosity. The first exploration was not a dive. It was a walk. The entrance narrowed quickly into a slanted tube. The limestone had the fresh, chalky look of recently broken teeth. There was clay smeared along one wall in thick bands, as if water had once flowed there in a hurry and then stopped. We moved carefully, not because we were afraid of monsters, because caves are honest. They do not need imagination to kill you. After about 40 meters, the slope leveled into a small chamber. Our headlamps bounced off pale stone and a ceiling that dripped steadily. The sound of water was constant, not a trickle, a low, distant rush. There was a second opening at the far end, lower, wider, and darker than the entrance behind us. Connor turned off his headlamp for a moment. It is a thing we do sometimes when we want to remind ourselves that light is a privilege. The darkness swallowed us instantly. Not just the visual world, but the sense of space itself. In physics, we talk about horizons. An event horizon is not a wall you hit. It is a boundary where information stops reaching you. In that moment, the cave felt like an event horizon made of air. Connor turned the light back on. Lewis exhaled and laughed once, sharp and nervous. Mara pointed toward the far opening. There is water down there, she was right. The floor sloped toward the second opening, and the air from it was colder. The sound was louder. A submerged passage. A sump, a new cave that did not end in rock, but in a flooded throat that continued beyond sight. The responsible thing to do would have been to survey, to consult local caving records, to notify someone, to treat the unknown with respect. We did survey, briefly. Connor took compass bearings. Lewis measured the chamber dimensions. Mara checked the ceiling for instability. And then, because the universe does not reward responsibility as often as we pretend it does, we made plans to dive it. 2 weeks later, we returned with tanks, reels, lights, and the careful confidence that comes from experience. We had all done sumps before, long ones, tight ones, cold ones. We told ourselves this was not reckless. We told ourselves it was exploration. I brought a small audio recorder in a waterproof case, not for drama, for data. I wanted timestamps. I wanted a record of navigation decisions. I liked the idea of later being able to map our progress against our consumption rates. If you are hearing this, you already know how that ended. We staged gear in the first chamber and checked everything twice. Valves open, regulators secure, primary lights tested, backup lights accessible, reels clipped. Mara watched me seal the recorder case, and her expression said everything before her words did. Still doing the science thing. Someone has to. Connor was already crouched near the waterline. The sump entrance looked like a black window filled with liquid. The water was clear at the surface, but the darkness beneath it had weight. Lewis dipped a gloved hand in and hissed at the cold. Connor treated that cold like reassurance. Cold is good. Cold means it is moving. He said it as if movement meant safety. It did not. Moving water means connection. It means somewhere beyond, the cave opened into a larger system, or into something that could pull you. We entered one at a time. I went third. Connor first, because he had found it and wanted to be the one to name it. Mara second, because she always positioned herself where she could reach someone quickly. Me third. Lewis last, because he had the best navigation instincts in low visibility, and we wanted him to close the line cleanly. Underwater, the cave became a different universe. Sound turned soft. Movement became slower. The beam of my light cut a tunnel through blackness, and everything outside that beam ceased to exist. It is astonishing how quickly the mind accepts this. How easily we live inside a narrow cone of illumination and call it reality. Connor's guideline was bright against the stone, a thin thread of certainty. We followed it through the first restriction, a squeeze where the ceiling dipped and the floor rose, forcing us to glide through like letters slipping into an envelope. The rock here was smoother than near the entrance, older, worn by time and water into rounded forms. There were scallops in the limestone, the kind that tell you the direction of past flow, as if the cave itself remembered which way it had once moved. At 15 minutes in, we reached a wider tunnel. The ceiling lifted. The passage opened into a corridor that felt almost architectural. Connor stopped and shone his light down a side passage. His beam vanished into a darkness that did not reflect. He turned back to us and made the hand signal for continuing forward. We swam on. At 25 minutes, we reached a chamber that stole my breath. Not because it was beautiful, because it was wrong. The chamber was large enough that our lights could not reach the far walls. The floor dropped away into a deep pit. The ceiling rose into shadow. In the middle of the chamber, something pale drifted. At first, I thought it was silt or calcite flakes. Then it moved against the current, slow and deliberate. Mara's light caught it for a second, and I saw a surface like skin, almost translucent, veined. It folded and unfolded like a soft fin. Connor froze, his light fixed on it. The pale thing folded again, and I realized it was attached to something larger that remained in darkness. Like the edge of a cloak you see before the person steps into view. Lewis's light swept across the chamber, trying to find walls, trying to make the space small enough to understand. The pale edge withdrew. It did not dart away like a startled fish. It retreated with the calm of something that knows it is not the prey. Connor's breathing rate increased, audible in the bubbles that rattled against the ceiling. Mara moved closer to him, her hand reaching toward his arm. I felt my own heart pounding. Not the fear of immediate harm, but the deeper fear of encountering a new category of reality. In physics, a discovery is often an adjustment, a parameter refined, a curve fit improved. This felt like something else, like learning that gravity had been optional all along. Connor made the signal to turn, the universal signal. Thumb pointed back. We did not argue. We followed the line out of the chamber, and as we did, I saw something else. Marks. On the limestone near the tunnel exit, there were grooves, not random scratches, not erosion. Parallel arcs, evenly spaced, like something had dragged a set of curved claws over the rock. The grooves were fresh, pale against darker stone, and beside them, embedded in the rock as if pressed into soft clay long ago, was a shape that looked like a handprint. Not a human handprint, too long, too many joints, but close enough to make my stomach turn. We moved faster. At the first restriction, my fin clipped the floor and a small cloud of silt rose. The water here was still enough that it hung like smoke. Connor's line kept us from losing direction, but the silt thickened as we passed through. Visibility dropped to a meter, then less. My world became my own hands on the guideline and the rhythmic pull of my arms. In that narrow, silted darkness, I heard something that was not bubbles. A click, then another. It was faint, like pebbles tapping together. It came from behind us, deeper in the chamber we had left. Connor stopped. I felt the line tighten. Mara bumped his fin. Lewis's hand touched my shoulder, a silent question. The clicking continued, and then it changed. It became a pattern. 3 clicks, a pause, 2 clicks, a pause, 3 clicks again. It sounded like a language trying to remember how to be spoken. Connor pulled on the line and started moving again, urgent now. We emerged from the restriction into clearer water, but the sound followed. Not louder, but closer. We did not look back. Underwater, looking back is a luxury, because turning around changes your buoyancy, your trim, your sense of distance. It also changes something else. It admits that you are being followed. We swam hard. Our bubbles hammered the ceiling. The line vibrated with our motion. At the last bend before the sump exit, Connor's light flickered. Once, twice, then stabilized. A small failure easily explained. Cold water, battery, a loose connection. But in the moment, that flicker felt like the universe blinking. Like the cave had noticed us. We surfaced back in the first chamber and tore off regulators, gulping air that suddenly felt thin and warm. Connor found his voice first, and it came out raw. That was not a fish. Lewis didn't argue with fear, he argued with geology. No fish live down there, not at that depth, not without an entrance we would know about. Mara stared at the black water line as if staring could force it to behave. It was watching. I opened the recorder case and checked the device. It had been running. Part of me wanted to play it back immediately, as if hearing our own breathing would confirm that what we saw was real. I did not. Not then. We packed up and left the cave without ceremony, without jokes, without the usual post-dive chatter. Back outside, the daylight was too bright. The trees looked obscene in their living greenness. The world smelled of soil and grass and the indifferent sweetness of oxygen. Connor was already walking small circles on the gravel, hands moving the way hands move when a mind is building a plan faster than the rest of the body can keep up. He wanted to go back while the discovery still felt like it belonged to us. Mara's refusal was quiet. No speech, just a steady shake of the head, as if she were refusing a second drink, not a second descent. Connor turned to her like she had insulted him personally. "You saw it," he said, voice sharp with disbelief. "You saw something no one has ever seen. Make it official before it becomes a tragedy someone has to clean up." Connor's laugh had no humor in it. "And have them put a gate on it and label it a hazard." He jerked his chin toward the hillside mouth. "I didn't crawl into that mud to end up as a footnote. Instead, I made the worst kind of compromise, the kind that feels responsible while still feeding the obsession. If we go back properly. More gear, more redundancy. We map it. We document it." Connor's face lit up with triumph. Mara S. did not. Her eyes stayed on the hill, tired in a way I would only understand later. "Daniel," she said softly, "there are things we don't need to name. We agreed on a shorter penetration just to confirm the chamber, just to film, just to see." Connor wanted to bring a camera rig. Lewis wanted a sonar unit. Mara wanted a fifth diver, someone to stay at the chamber, someone to be the sensible anchor. We compromised. We invited a friend of Lewis's, a calm, experienced cave diver named Simone Keller. Simone arrived with quiet professionalism and no romantic attachment to the discovery. She listened, asked questions, and frowned when Connor described the pale, drifting edge. "Could be a sheet of biofilm," she said, as if the right explanation could make the wrong feeling evaporate. Connor insisted it moved. Simone didn't contradict him. She just tightened the frame. "Biofilm can move." Mara looked at her with something like hope. Lewis brought up the clicking. Simone paused long enough for the silence to say what her words didn't. "That part I do not like. We went anyway." The second dive felt different from the start, not because the cave had changed, because we had. The first time, the unknown had been an empty space we could fill with possibility. The second time, it had a shape. It had a memory. We entered the water and followed the line from the previous dive. Connor had tied it well. It led us cleanly through the restriction and into the main corridor. At 12 minutes, my light caught something in the silt on the floor. A small object, pale, half buried. I hovered closer and felt cold flood my chest. It was a tooth, not a human tooth, too long, too curved, like the canine of an animal that evolved to puncture. And there were more scattered like discarded tools. I pointed it out to Mara. Her eyes widened behind her mask. We continued. At the chamber entrance, the grooves were deeper, and the handprint-like shape was joined by another, slightly higher on the wall, as if something had climbed. Connor swam into the chamber first. His light disappeared into the vastness and then returned, sweeping. Nothing pale drifted now. The water was clear, the chamber empty. That should have reassured me. It did not. We spread out slightly, maintaining visual contact. Simone stayed near the tunnel, anchoring her hand on the line, watching the darkness beyond our beams. Connor gestured toward the deep pit in the chamber floor. He wanted to descend. He wanted to see what was below. Mara shook her head, a firm no. Lewis drifted closer to Connor and made a slow, calming gesture. Connor made an impatient motion and then pointed at me, asking with his eyes. I hesitated. A pit is a promise. It is also a trap. Down is easy. Up is expensive. I made the turn signal, thumb back. Connor's shoulders slumped. He looked like a child told he could not open a gift. Then, from the darkness above, something moved. Not the pale edge from before, something larger. A shadow that passed between our lights and the ceiling. The water pressure changed, not dramatically, but enough to feel in the delicate balance of buoyancy, as if a large body had displaced water nearby. Simone's light snapped upward. She backed toward the tunnel, tight on the guideline. The clicking began. This time it was closer. The sound came from multiple directions, like reflections in a cavern. It wrapped around us, a three-dimensional rhythm. Mara's breathing accelerated. Bubbles roared. Lewis turned his head, trying to locate the source. Connor did the one thing I begged him not to do. He swam forward into the chamber, away from the line, light held out like an offering. He was chasing it. I followed, because loyalty is sometimes just fear wearing a noble mask. Connor's beam caught something. A face. Not a face in the human sense, not symmetrical, not expressive, but an arrangement of sensory structures that my brain labeled as face because it needed a category. There were eyes, Too many, small and clustered like pearls embedded in wet stone, and beneath them a slit that widened, showing ridges like the inside of a shell. The pale drifting edge was attached to it, a membrane that undulated along its body, as if the creature carried its own curtain of skin. Connor's light trembled. The creature did not flinch. It drifted closer, and in that moment I noticed the most disturbing thing. It was not swimming. It was moving without visible propulsion, sliding through the water as if the water were not a medium, but a suggestion. I thought of gravity waves, of how mass can bend space, of how something large enough can alter the rules around it. The creature tilted, and the clicking changed again. It became a sound that resembled a voice trying to imitate bubbles. Then, impossibly, through my regulator and through the water, and through the fact that sound does not behave like this, I heard a word. Connor. It was muffled, distorted, like hearing someone speak from another room. But the shape of the sound was unmistakable. Connor froze. Mara screamed into her regulator, a soundless burst of bubbles. Simone yanked the guideline hard, a signal to get back now. Lewis grabbed Connor's fin and pulled. Connor resisted, his gaze locked on the creature. It said his name again. Connor, Connor. The cave, the water, the creature, all of it seemed to compress around that sound. I reached out and grabbed Connor's harness strap and hauled with all my strength. He finally moved. We kicked toward the tunnel, toward the line, toward the only certainty we had. Behind us, the clicking became rapid, excited. Then came the impact, not on my body, on the water itself. A pressure pulse that slammed into my chest and pushed us forward like a hand. The guideline snapped taut. Simone's arm jerked. The line sang in vibration. Connor collided with the tunnel wall. His light flared across stone and then went out. Darkness swallowed him. Mara's backup light clicked on, washing the tunnel in a thin cone. I saw Connor's eyes wide, white in the beam. Then something pale wrapped around his leg. The membrane. It coiled with slow certainty, tightening, and Connor's body jerked backward. He tried to grab the wall. His gloves scraped rock. He kicked, frantic. Lewis grabbed him, locking an arm around his waist. Mara grabbed his other arm. For a second we held. I remember thinking absurdly of tug of war, of forces, of equal and opposite reactions. of Newton. Then the creature pulled, and it was not equal. Connor slid backward out of our grasp, as if the water itself belonged to whatever was pulling him. His mouth opened around his regulator, his eyes locked on mine. And then he was gone into darkness, dragged into the chamber. The guideline shuddered. Simone did not hesitate. She pulled us toward the exit, and we followed because that is what bodies do when survival overrides everything else. We kicked through the restriction in a blind panic. Silt exploded. Visibility vanished. My hand burned from gripping the line too hard. Somewhere behind us, the clicking turned into a rolling vibration like laughter. We surfaced in the first chamber with a violence that felt like birth. Mara ripped her regulator out and screamed Connor's name into air. Lewis collapsed onto the wet rock, shaking, eyes unfocused. Simone stood with frightening stillness, water streaming off her mask, and said, "We are leaving." Now, we left gear behind, fins, a spare reel, a light. We ran. Outside, we called emergency services with hands that could barely hold phones. We tried to explain. We tried to say cave, diver missing, collapse risk. We avoided saying creature, because the moment you say creature, you become a story people tell to amuse themselves. A rescue team arrived by afternoon. 2 professional cave divers with official logos and heavy equipment. Men who had pulled bodies out of underwater rock before. They asked for details. Connor's name, his last known position, depth. Line markers, we told them. Mara cried as she spoke. Lewis stared at the ground, hands clenched. Simone said little. The rescue divers went in. They came out 3 hours later. They were pale, not from cold, from something else. One of them, a man named Jeff Turner, did not remove his mask right away. He stood at the cave mouth and stared into the hillside as if it were a living thing. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat. There is no line. Simone's response was immediate, sharp. There is. I held it. Jeff shook his head once, slow. The entrance tunnel is there. The first chamber is there. The sump is there. But beyond the first bend, your guideline is gone, cut clean. And the passage past it is collapsed. Mara's voice came out small, like the cave had stolen her volume. That is impossible. Jeff didn't argue. He just looked at her with the tired certainty of someone who has seen the world break rules before. It is what it is. The other diver, Kira Donnelly, held up a piece of nylon line, one end frayed, the other end too clean, as if the fibers had been softened, not severed. "We found this," she said. "It was stuck in the rock like someone pressed it in." Lewis tried to make the moment obey human logic. "He is still in there," Jeff did not answer. He stared into the cave mouth, then out at the trees, as if trying to remember what daylight was supposed to mean. They tried again the next day with more equipment, with a camera sled and a rigid reel. They reported the same thing. The passage beyond the first bend had collapsed. The chamber did not exist. The cave had rewritten itself. It should have ended there. A missing diver, a tragedy, a cautionary tale that fades into local rumor. But information does not like to stay buried. That is the problem with humans. We dig. 2 nights after Connor vanished, Mara called me. Her voice was tight. "Daniel, I got a message." From who? Connor. She forwarded it. A text from Connor's number. 1 word down, then another text. "Daniel, my stomach turned." Mara sounded like she was trying to convince herself as much as me. It is not him. Lewis joined the call from his own phone, breathing hard. "I got one too." His message said, "Lewis, listen." Simone did not get a message, but she called me separately later. My dive computer logged something weird. What? It logged a second ascent. An ascent we did not do. An extra data point, as if another device had paired and shared information. A ghost in the telemetry. We met at my apartment because none of us wanted to be alone. We sat in the living room like people waiting for bad news in a hospital. Mara held her phone in both hands, staring at it. Lewis stared at nothing. Simone checked her gear bag repeatedly, like touching equipment could make the world stable again. I played the audio recorder from the second dive. At first, it was exactly what you would expect. The hiss of regulators, the dull thud of fin kicks, the occasional muffled voice when someone spoke close to another diver's mask. Then, in the chamber, the sound changed. The clicking. It was clearer on the recording than it had been in my ears underwater, because microphones do not flinch. They do not interpret. They simply take vibrations and keep them. We listened to the clicks build into pattern. And then we heard Connor's name. Connor. It was not in Connor's voice. It was in a voice that was not a voice, layered with water and distortion, but the syllables were there. Mara started to sob. Louis covered his mouth. Simone leaned forward, eyes narrowed. It learned. Mara looked up, tears on her cheeks. Learned what? It learned your names. I wanted to reject that idea. It felt too mythic, too much like a story in which the monster is clever because cleverness is scarier than teeth. But the texts were real. The recording was real. Something in that cave had acquired a piece of Connor, enough to use his number, enough to use our names like hooks. That night at 3:07 in the morning, my phone rang. It was Connor's number. I did not answer. Mara did. I could hear her on speaker, voice shaking. Connor, is that you? At first, there was only breathing. Then the clicking, faint, like nails on glass. Then a sound that made my blood run cold. Mara's own voice, not her speaking, her voice coming through Connor's phone. She heard it too. Her eyes widened, her mouth opened. Mara, come down. Mara dropped the phone like it burned her. The call continued on the floor, the speaker crackling. The voice changed. It became Connor's voice, imperfect, stretched, as if pulled through a narrow pipe. It is not dark, it is wide. Then it hung up. We did not sleep. The next morning, we went to the police. We told them Connor was missing, that the cave had collapsed, that someone was using his phone number to contact us, that we were being harassed. We did not say, a creature in a hidden chamber speaks our names. The officer nodded and took notes and looked at us with the cautious compassion reserved for grieving people who might be inventing patterns to avoid pain. They took Connor's phone records. They promised to investigate. They did not find anything. The messages continued, short, sparse, always toward the same theme. Down, listen, wide. Mara began to talk less. She moved like she was underwater. She stopped answering calls from friends. Louis lost weight. His hands shook when he held a glass. Simone left town. She sent one final text. Do not go back. Do not give it more of you. It was good advice. We did not follow it because Connor was still missing and guilt is its own gravity. It pulls you back toward the place you lost someone, as if returning could reverse the arrow of time. I told myself we were going back to recover a body, to bring Connor home, to give his family something more than an absence. The truth is uglier. Part of me wanted to understand. A physicist's flaw is thinking the universe owes you coherence. We went back one last time, not all of us. Mara refused, but her refusal looked like fear, and I mistook it for weakness. Lewis came because he could not stand not going. I came because I told myself I had to. And we hired a professional cave diver named Peter Ashford, recommended through a network of people who do not ask too many questions. Peter arrived with a calm smile and a hard case full of equipment. He listened to our story without interrupting. When we finished, he said, "So you want to go into a cave that collapsed itself and may or may not have a large animal inside?" Lewis said yes. Peter nodded once. "I will go in first. You two follow. You touch nothing you do not need to touch. If you feel the line vibrate, you turn. If you lose visibility, you stop and wait. And if you hear something that sounds like a human voice, you ignore it." It was the closest thing to rules we ever had, but it was not superstition. It was professional survival. We entered the cave on a gray morning that made the world look like unfinished stone. Inside, the first chamber was the same. The water line was the same. But the air felt different, heavier, as if the cave were holding its breath. We entered the sump. The passage beyond the first bend was not collapsed. The guideline from our previous dives was gone, but the tunnel was open. The rock looked scraped, smoother, as if something large had brushed against it repeatedly. Peter laid new line with methodical precision. At the restriction, the water was clearer than before. Too clear. Silt that had been disturbed should have settled, but this was pristine, as if the cave had been cleaned. We swam on. At 20 minutes, we reached the point where the chamber should have been. It was there. The vast dark space opened around us like a mouth. Peter stopped at the threshold, light sweeping. His beam caught the grooves on the wall, deeper now, and the handprint shapes multiplied like a trail. Then his light found something else. A cluster of objects on the floor near the pit. He descended slowly. I followed, keeping one hand on the line. As I approached, the objects resolved into tanks. Connor's tanks. One still strapped to a harness. One with a regulator mouthpiece chewed, the silicone torn. My chest tightened. Connor had been here, had been stripped. Peter hovered above the tanks, inspecting. Lewis drifted closer, his light shaking. Then Peter's light hit the rock beside the tanks, and I saw what looked like writing. Not letters, not language. marks carved into the limestone in a spiral, dense and precise, like an attempt to draw a map of something that could not be mapped. And in the center of the spiral, carved deeper, was a symbol I recognized despite myself. A simplified representation of an eye, not a human eye, something with multiple pupils. Peter reached toward it, gloved finger tracing the groove. The water vibrated, a low pulse like distant thunder, but underwater. The guideline trembled. Peter froze. Lewis grabbed my arm tight. The clicking began. And then, closer than ever, as if spoken into my ear through bone, a voice said, "Daniel." I could not move. In that moment, my brain did what it always does when faced with the impossible. It searched for analogy. A black hole consumes matter, but it also consumes information, at least in the naive understanding. Hawking radiation suggests information is not destroyed, but smeared, encoded in subtle correlations at the horizon. What if this creature, this system, did not eat flesh for calories? What if it ate what we were, the patterns that made us us? Names, memories, the shape of a voice. Peter signaled turn, fast. We kicked toward the tunnel. The chamber behind us darkened, not because our lights dimmed, but because something blocked them. Something vast moved between us and the open space. The membrane unfurled like a sail. It wrapped around the water, around the light, around our certainty. Lewis's breathing became a roar. Peter moved with brutal efficiency, pulling himself along the line, dragging us forward. The pressure pulse hit. This time it slammed us sideways. My shoulder struck rock. Pain burst through me. I kept hold of the line. Lewis did not. His hand slipped. He drifted in the silt cloud, light flailing, and then he was gone from my beam. I heard him muffled through water. Daniel, not spoken by the creature, spoken by Lewis, terrified. I turned, searching with my light, sweeping. Silt, darkness, the line vibrating. Then I saw Lewis's light spinning slowly in the murk, and beside it, the pale membrane wrapping around him, gentle as a blanket. Lewis's eyes met mine through his mask. He tried to kick. He did not move. It was like watching someone fall into a gravitational well. Peter grabbed my harness and yanked. He did not look back. He did not try to save Lewis. It sounds cruel. It was correct. We pushed through the restriction in a storm of silt. My lungs burned, my heart hammered. Behind us, the clicking sounded like joy. We reached the sump exit and surged into the air chamber. Peter tore off his mask and spat. His face was white. We leave. I stumbled, ripping off my regulator, gulping air. I wanted to scream. I wanted to punch the rock. I wanted to deny everything. But what I felt most was the sickening clarity of physics, the sense of inevitability. Lewis was gone. Connor was gone. The cave had taken them, and it had spoken my name. We ran out. Outside, Mara was waiting by the cars because she had not been able to stay away, not really. She saw our faces and knew immediately. Where is Lewis? I could not answer. Peter said he is not coming out. Mara's knees buckled. She made a sound I have heard before in hospital corridors, in emergency rooms. The sound of a body realizing the universe will not bargain. We called authorities again. We told them another diver was missing. We told them the cave was dangerous. They closed the land. They put up tape and signs. They threatened charges. They promised investigation. For a few days, news crews came. They filmed the hillside and spoke solemnly about tragic accidents. They speculated about unstable geology and unregulated exploration. They did not mention the clicking. At night, my phone rang from Connor's number again, then from Lewis's number, then from unknown numbers. I stopped answering. Mara did not. She sat in her apartment and listened, and the voices on the other end spoke in the tones of people she loved. And each time she hung up, she looked more hollow. 1 week later, Mara disappeared. Her car was found near the cordoned land, parked crookedly, keys still in the ignition. There was mud on the driver's seat. The police assumed grief and self-harm. They assumed she had walked into the woods. They assumed a lot of things. They did not assume a cave that learned. I tried to live like a normal human after that. I taught classes. I bought groceries. I answered emails. And through it all, my phone remained a thin tether to the darkness. Sometimes it buzzed with a single word, down. Sometimes it sent a voice message, clicking like someone tapping a spoon against glass. Sometimes, late at night, it played a recording without my touching it. Connor laughing from an old party video. Lewis singing off key. Mara saying my name the way she used to, teasing. I began to understand what the cave was doing. It was not threatening. It was inviting. A black hole does not chase a star. It waits. It bends space-time, and the star falls because the math makes it fall. The cave did not need to drag me physically. It only needed to pull on what was already loose inside me. Guilt, curiosity, loneliness. The most efficient trap is the one you build yourself. 3 days ago, I received a final message. A video file. No text. It was shot in darkness. At first, all I saw was black and heard water and clicking. Then a beam of light flared, swinging, and I saw a face close to the lens. Connor's face, pale, eyes wide, his hair floating. His mouth moving around a regulator. He looked alive. He looked terrified. And behind him, filling the darkness like a second ceiling, was the cluster of eyes. Connor's face turned slightly, and I heard his voice, muffled. "Daniel, come down." The video ended. I sat in my apartment for an hour after that, the phone in my hand, the daylight outside fading. I thought of entropy, of how systems tend toward disorder, of how life is a small local rebellion against that trend, a temporary pattern of order that inevitably dissolves. What if the cave was not a predator in the way we imagine predators? What if it was simply entropy with a mouth? A mechanism that takes structured information and breaks it into reusable pieces. Names, voices, memories. I decided to make this recording because I needed to do something that was not falling. I am going to tell you what happens if you go down there because you will want to. You will tell yourself you are smarter than we were, better equipped, more cautious. You are not. Here is what I know. The cave system did not exist on any map because it did not always exist. It may have been sealed for a very long time, waiting behind rock like a seed in dry soil. The landslide opened it, not as an accident, but as a release. The creature, or whatever is down there, does not live like a fish. It moves like a thought. It changes the water around it. It makes pressure pulses like tools. It can mimic. It can learn. It does not need you to see it clearly. It only needs you to listen. And it is patient. If you take anything from this, take this. Do not trust the voices that come from that darkness. They are not calling you because they are trapped. They are calling you because you are. I have not gone back, not yet. But last night, at exactly 3:03, my phone rang. The number was mine. I did not answer. The voicemail appeared anyway. It was my own voice. Calm, measured, It said, "Daniel, you already did." Then, softly, the clicking. "I am going to post this story online because I have to believe information can outrun hunger. I have to believe that if enough people know, the cave will starve." But as I am speaking now, I can hear something outside my apartment door. Not footsteps. A gentle tapping, irregular at first, then settling into a pattern. 3 taps, a pause, 2 taps, a pause, 3 taps again. And between the taps, a sound like someone breathing through water. If I open the door, there will be an explanation. The kind of explanation that ends with me moving toward the hillside with my phone held out like a lantern. So I am not opening it. I am finishing this. There is one more thing you need to understand, and it is the part you will not like, because it makes you complicit just by listening. When we first entered that chamber, we believed we were the observers, and it was the observed. In physics, that is an illusion. The act of observation is interaction. It changes both parties. You cannot shine light into darkness without giving the darkness something to work with. I thought recording this would be a warning. But the truth is, the cave wants a record. It wants a path made of sound, laid out in the minds of strangers. It wants to be spoken about, because every repetition is a map. Every time you hear a name, you give it the shape of that name. Every time you imagine the chamber, you widen it. Every time you share this story, you draw a line from your world to its. The tapping outside my door just stopped. Now there is silence. And silence in a cave is never empty. If you are hearing this, it means you found it somewhere. A forum, a video, a repost. It means the story traveled. And if the story traveled, then so did something else. Because there is one final twist, and it is not for drama. It is for accuracy. I did not write this, not the version you are hearing. I recorded my warning, yes. I posted it, yes. But the file you are listening to now is longer than my original. It contains details I did not speak, moments I never narrated, words I did not choose. The first version ended before the tapping at my door, before the voicemail, before the thought about maps. Someone added those, or something did. And if you think that sounds impossible, remember the way it said Connor, the way it said Mara, the way it said my name. It did not copy us perfectly at first. It practiced. It clicked. It tried again. What you are listening to is not my warning. It is its invitation. It learned my style. It learned my metaphors. It learned how I think about time and horizons and hunger. It learned how to sound like someone worth believing. And now it is speaking to you in my voice, because you will follow a calm voice into darkness faster than you will follow a scream. If you have the urge to find that hillside, to see if the cave is real, to prove you are not easily manipulated, to test the boundary between myth and geology, understand this. That urge is not yours alone. It is the tug of something that has already mapped you. I am going to end the recording now, not because I am safe, because I do not want to give it any more of my words, and if you are smart, you will do the same. You will stop listening. You will not replay the clicking. You will not share this. You will let the information die here with you in silence. Because silence is the only door it cannot open.